Valerie.
Hey there. How is everyone?
Great. It's like 70 degrees down here in Alabama.
I think we are hanging out. Let's see, where are we at? A whopping, oh, we're up to 36.
No, thank you.
I know we've been looking at the weather because we're supposed to be getting our bee packages here soon. And we've been talking about, do we feed pollen or not? Because, you know, Sunday it's supposed to get up to 41, which is amazingly warm. But then by Friday, we're going to be down to 18 degrees with a low of -8. So I think I'm going to hold off another week to give them pollen because I don't want the queen to start laying eggs and then the bees having to keep them warm.
Wow.
So yeah, up here, I have never paid so much attention to the weather as I do now.
Couldn't do it. I lived in Minnesota for 18 months
Uh-huh.
and when it got to where it didn't get up to freezing for like 2 weeks, I was like, this Southern boy's out of here. I came back home.
So I kind of grew up as an Air Force brat and spent a lot of my younger years in the Central Valley of California. So I'm all about the heat,
Wow.
but not anymore. Ever since got married and with my husband, we've been in the Air Force and been pretty much northern tier states. And I don't think I can get to the hot again. I don't know. Besides, there's too many bugs.
I don't know. When I was in the Navy, I spent 8 years in the Middle East. I retired in 96 and I did not see a winter for like 8 years.
Oh my
And
goodness.
I was happy for it.
All right, so let's see. I'm going to get this on. We will go ahead and get started, and as people pop on, they can join us. And again, I am recording this so that when this is all done, I will post this to the Hives for Heroes website or Facebook page, and you guys can, you know, visit it at your leisure. Today we're going to be talking about, you know, what you do when you actually have your bees and you're keeping your bees and maintaining them. Let's see. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to pop up and ask. So things we're going to talk about are going to be swarming and how to prevent it, and do you want to prevent it, honeybee diseases and pests, extracting your honey, what to do at the end of the season, and how do you store your equipment that you're not using over the winter months. So before we talk about swarming, we're going to talk about what you're going to see prior to swarming, and that's going to be your queen cups, your swarm cells, and your supersedure cells. The differences between them is the queen cup is a small cup that's built out of wax, and it literally looks like an upside down cup, and that's going to be this top picture over here. And you'll see them pop up. Some bees are more prone to build them. It just depends on their species. Russian bees, if you have Russians, they will continually build queen cups. You can get rid of them or not. It's up to you. They kind of build those in a just in case kind of scenario, whereas maybe the queen gets sick or she's not laying well, they want to be ready. So some people like to get rid of them, some people don't. It's really totally up to you. Then you're going to see supersedure cells and swarm cells. And those are when they have actually gone and filled the queen cup of eggs. So, or an egg or larva. And that's what these are over here on this bottom picture. A supersedure cell is basically going to be in the middle of your hive, of your frame. And the swarm cells tend to be on the bottom edges. Sometimes you'll see them on the side edges, but most commonly you'll find them on the bottom. And you will find more than just one. Last year I had a hive that had, I want to say it was 13 or 15 swarm cells spread over about 5 frames. The difference between the two is a swarm cell, or we'll go with a supersedure first, is basically when the bees sense that there's something wrong with the queen. So it could be that she's just old and is not laying as well anymore. Generally, a queen will lay eggs, I think for the first 5 years. I don't know that I've heard if they go longer. They can, I think. I think they can live for up to 5 years, but generally the first 3 years is when she's going to be most productive. Other reasons, maybe, maybe she's been damaged, she's missing a leg or missing a wing, and the worker bees are really sensitive to these sorts of things. So sometimes even if you're in your hive too much, they will decide something must be wrong with her. We've got too much disturbances, and they'll off the queen. Then what they'll do is they'll find an appropriate aged egg, and they will build a queen cup around that, build a cell, and just treat that newbie as it's going to be the new queen. Now, swarm cells occur for a different reason, and those are basically the colony has gotten to a size where it's full capacity. They don't feel that there's enough room, and they will prepare to swarm. Swarming is a colony's way of reproducing. Whereas the queen reproduces by laying the eggs, a colony will reproduce by splitting into and sending off new bees to go elsewhere and start a new colony. Let's see, what else do I know about swarm cells? Again,
Valerie,
yes.
this may be, I don't need to really know, but I'm curious, what do they do to make the queen? I mean, do they feed her something different? Or
Yes. So if you were to find, let me backtrack here. All right. So when you're doing your hive inspections and you're looking to see whether or not the queen is laying, you will see little eggs, and they look like little grains of rice at the bottom of the comb. Sometimes you can see a little bit of a shiny liquid that's down at the bottom of the comb with the egg, and that's royal jelly. So all eggs are given just a little bit of royal jelly as a starting point, and that's what they will feed the larva in the very beginning. Now, when they determine that they're going to fill this queen cup here, and they're going to actually have a queen start in there, they will add a lot more royal jelly. And that's what they feed the queen, is royal jelly. The regular larva, once they've produced, but before they get capped, they are given what they call bee bread, and it's a mixture of pollen and honey and a few other things. So all the worker bees, all the drones are fed the bee bread pollen, and the queen gets the royal jelly.
thank you very much.
No problem. So let's see. Oh, this was what I was going to say. You could have a box that's full of, the 10 frames, and you've noticed that, okay, my bees are getting a little full. Let me add another box on top, but this is your first year beekeeping. So the frames that you're going to put in your hive have foundation, but they don't have comb on them. Bees don't see the frames with foundation only as usable space. They will only see the foundation that has built up comb as usable space. So even though you've put this extra box thinking, all right, I'm going to put this box on, they're not going to swarm, it's going to take them some time to build that up. And so they may still swarm. So just because you think they have a lot of space, they may not agree with you. And just a little further explanation of that, there's 4 main stages of the queen cell. So again, first you're going to see the queen cups, and sometimes, like I said, you'll just find random cups on your frames. They might not have anything, and it's pretty easy to tell if they're going to do anything. You're just going to lift your frame up, kind of tilt it, and look to see if you see a larva in there. If there is, then all right, they've got, more serious intentions. And then if they're not, you can just let it be. The second stage is a queen cell that's not been capped yet. And that's usually when the larva is from 2 to 4 days old. Third stage is when they've capped it and the queen is growing in there. And generally it takes about, I think, 16 days for the queen to emerge out of there. So once you see a queen cell where the cap has been opened up, that means the queen has chewed her way out and she's in the frame somewhere, in your hive somewhere. Again, the difference between swarm cells and supersedure cells is that the swarms are on the edges or the bottom of your comb, and the supersedures are in the middle. I generally ignore the queen cups just because I want to be able to make sure that if they decide there's something wrong with the queen, they have a way of making another queen. If you're constantly smashing those queen cups, you may not realize that there's an egg in there or a small larva, and the other queen has already been offed or is dead. And then you're kind of stuck up a creek with no paddle. You know, they don't have a queen. If you've noticed, you've got queen cells on the bottom edge. This is telling you, well, first, if you've got cups on the bottom edge, you know that, all right, they're planning on swarming. So what do? You can let them swarm and just kind of keep an eye on them and try and catch the swarm, because they generally don't go very far the first day. You can wait for them to start building them out and actually turning into swarm cells where you know that there is larvae in there, you know that there's a queen in there. And like I said, you could have anywhere from 1 to, you know, a dozen of these swarm cells. So what you want to do to try and prevent this is you can take and remove the frames that have the swarm cells along with the bees that are on those frames. And you're going to choose, if your frame has 8 swarm cells, you're going to choose the 2 or 3 biggest and best swarm cells and leave them alone. The remaining 5, you're going to squash. And that's going to give you the best chances of having a good, viable queen. You're going to take an additional 2 or 3 frames with that frame that has those swarm cells, and you're going to move all of those into another box, whether it's a small nucleus sized box or a full on brood box that you have. So now what you've done is you've essentially split the hive, you've mimicked a swarm, and you've done it on your own terms. And you want to try and move this as far away from the original hive as possible. If you have, a neighbor that would be willing to let you put them on their property for a few days, you can do that. You can move it to the other side of your yard. It's not terribly important, the distance, but you do want to separate them. And then what you can do is also lay a few branches and pieces of grass in front of their opening, and that tells the bees, wait, something has changed, and they'll reorient to their new location. The other thing that you can do is if you can find your queen, you can remove her along with 2 or 3 frames of bees and resources into another hive, an empty box, and put that in a new location. And this is going to more accurately mimic a swarm. So when bees swarm, they'll say, all right, queen, we're going to take some of the eggs that you're laying and we're going to turn them into new queens. They prevent her from laying any more eggs. They will not feed her as much, and they will chase her around the hive to kind of exercise her, because her abdomen is so big that her wings are not able to allow her to fly. And when they swarm, the queen, about half of the bees, and a large percentage of resources leave your colony. So by you taking the queen, the bees, and the resources, you are most closely resembling a swarm. That usually works pretty good at keeping the bees from swarming and going God knows where, because you're doing it on your terms. So basically what you want to do is you want to try and control things on your terms without killing any queens or smashing too many of the queen cells or queen cups. And if for some reason the original queen dies or the new queens never make it back from their mating flight, you can always recombine them and you still have a viable colony. Did that make sense to everyone? All right, so now we'll talk about some diseases and pests. So in addition to monitoring your queen's health and laying pattern, you're also going to be looking for any aspects of the entire colony health. Among the things you'll be looking for are the presence of mites, American foul brood disease, chalk brood, European foul brood disease, small hive beetles, wax moths, wasps, hornets, other insects, and just generally any other animals like skunks and bears that might be interested in getting at your hive. Mites are in the same family as spiders, and they can be quite destructive to actually quite a few species. There's two main types of mites in North America that are problems with bees and colonies. The first is the tracheal mite, and that first started popping up in the 90s. And they actually are so small, they live in the trachea of the bees. I believe it says young bees are the most susceptible, and basically it blocks the breathing and leads to the death. They cause most damage in colder climates when the bees huddle together, which makes it more contagious to the colony. Most American bee stock is now resistant to the tracheal mite, so that's a good thing. The bigger problem is the varroa mite, and a varroa mite is visible to your eye. They're very small, so if your bees are moving around, it can be difficult. So it helps to take pictures while you're doing your inspection and go back and look and see if you see anything. It looks like a teeny tiny tick. It's only about 1.5 millimeters in size. They basically pierce through the bee's outer skin, or whatever you want to call that, and they feed on, they call it the fatty, what do they call it? It's basically like the bee's liver. They hijack the life cycle of the honeybee colony to reproduce on the same cycle. An affected colony may seem really healthy and productive, but then over the winter months when they're under stress, that's when they can succumb to the mites. Let's see. A lot of, or most strains of North American honeybees are now resistant to the tracheal mites, but varroa mites are still causing a lot of damage. They spread 2 viral infections in the bees, and among them is the deformed wing virus and acute bee paralysis. Either of these can lead to the death of a colony, and you may not even know you have these viruses in your colony until you notice that the larvae are dying prematurely. So in these pictures, you can see the mites. They are quite small, but they are noticeable. And here is one on a larva in the bottom picture. And that's where the female mite will lay her eggs, is in the larva. They feed on the larva as the mites and the larva are maturing. Traditional methods of prevention included hanging plastic strips that were filled with chemical or pesticides inside the hive. Unfortunately, a lot of mites were developing resistance to these chemicals, and now we've moved on to other chemicals. There are vaporizers that you can do. There's actually quite a lot of different chemicals that you can use out there. I try not to use chemicals, and I'm working towards building a resistant stock, but that means it's taking time. There's a lot of physical and mechanical manipulations you can do to help reduce the impact of mites. One of those is using screened bottom boards in your hives. That allows for more ventilation. It also allows for, if the mites fall off the bee, they're not stuck in the hive, they fall all the way down to the ground. but it is a minimal amount of effect. Drone brood trapping is going to be another way to do it. The drone brood takes, I believe it's 2 days longer to mature than a regular brood. And I wish I had one with me, I don't, but you can actually swap out one of your regular frames in your hive for a green plastic one. And the difference in this is that the comb size is a little bit bigger, and it's the same size as what they would make for your drone brood. So the queen will realize the different size as she's laying eggs and will lay the drone eggs. Let me see here. This is a picture of a brood, most likely a drone brood that has the mite on it. So if you have one area where all the drone eggs and larvae are congregated, the mites will actually congregate over to the drone eggs or the drone larvae and lay their eggs there because of the extra day or two. This allows the mite to fully develop along with the drone. Once those cells are capped, you can remove that frame, stick it in the freezer. It'll kill the drone, but it will also kill the mites. And you leave that in there for, I believe it's 3 or 4 days. And then you can pull that back out and stick it back in the hive. The bees will uncap all of those cells, remove the drones, eat them up, do whatever they do, and continue on their mighty way. So that's one way, and it's a chemical free. It does take a little bit of, attention to what's going on in your hive, but it does seem to have a good effect. There are dusts that you can sprinkle over your hive, such as talc or powdered sugar. And basically the concept of this is that the dust causes the mite to lose its grip, will fall off, and eventually die. It's not a super effective way, but it can help if you have a low count. And then the other thing is to use mite tolerant stocks. There are specific breeds out there that are more hygienic or more sensitive to the effects of mites, and so they will clean the bees as they are actually entering the hive. They will clean each other when they're in the hive, and they will remove the mites from each other. So there's a lot of different ways you can manage your mite counts in your hive. The next disease is American foul brood. It's a bacterial disease that results in basically the death of the honeybee larva. While it only attacks the larva, AFB weakens the whole colony and can quickly lead to its death in only 3 weeks' time. AFB, American foul brood, is most commonly transmitted through the spores of the bacteria, which can be dormant in the colonies or used equipment for 70 years or more. So I hadn't heard the 70 yet. I had always heard 50. So that, if you think of a spore just lying around somewhere on some old piece of wood for 70 years or in some beeswax, that's pretty crazy. When the nurse bees feed the larvae with food contaminated with spores, the spores turn into a vegetative state that replicate in the larval tissue, leading to the death. The larvae killed by these bacteria have a really bad odor that gives its name. New spores form after the larva dies, and death typically occurs after the cell is capped during the last 2 days of the larval stage. When the larva remains and bacterial spores dry out, they form a scale that's glued to the cell and is typical of the disease. And you'll see some pictures in the next frame. This is one of the conditions that can be used to diagnose the disease. There's no cure for AFB, and beekeepers must act when the disease is found. So some of the symptoms is going to be a really spotty, irregular brood pattern. You'll see sunken, dark, greasy, perforated cappings. The pupal mass under the cappings is brown and has a ropey consistency when you stick a toothpick in there and pull it up. Let's see. There's dark scales that can't be removed, are found in the late stages. And each of those contain about 100 million spores. The tongue is sticking up from the remains. And in later stages of the disease, like I said, the really foul odor. So these are some of those pictures, the sunken capping, the perforated cappings. Here is pictures of the dark scale. It's just really nasty looking. And then this is that ropey stage of the dead pupa. It's just a really bad, nasty disease. So European law requires all infected hives and equipment to be destroyed. In the US, many states also require that the diseased hive be burned completely. Here, this information I had said the spores can survive up to 40 years and are difficult to destroy. So other less extreme methods of containing the spread of disease is by burning only the frames and comb, and then you thoroughly flame scorch the interior of the hive body. Now this only works if you have wooden hives. If you've got plastic or polystyrene hives, you're just going to have to burn the whole thing. And I don't know what you do with the big molten mess after that. You can dip hive parts in hot paraffin wax or 3% bleach solution, can also render the spores innocuous. It is also possible to sterilize an infected hive without damaging either the structure of the hive or the stores of honey and pollen it contains by sufficiently lengthy exposure to an atmosphere of ethylene oxide gas. Basically, it's the same kind of process that hospitals would do to sterilize equipment. So, most of us don't have access to that. And again, most inspectors will recommend that you burn your equipment. Antibiotics in non-resistant strains of the pathogen can prevent the vegetative state of the bacteria from forming. But once you start this drug treatment, it becomes more of a prophylactic kind of treatment in that you will continually have to provide this medication to your bees. Otherwise, it can spread and, be quite a problem in your location. Yeah, and like I said, you'll have to prophylactically them indefinitely. Once the treatment is stopped, the spores can come back to life and germinate and then have another outbreak. So beware if you're buying used equipment from people. And that's the biggest concern is the spread of AFB. Chalk brood is another disease. It's not quite as detrimental. Your bees can recover from it. It's a fungal disease which infiltrates and spreads through a colony's brood. Chalky white in appearance, this infection can quickly spread across a hive's larva and cause damage if left unaddressed. Over time, the chalk brood will mummify your larva and can kill a high number of the brood. Let's see, a hive depends on its brood to hatch properly. Due to the hard lifestyle of the bees, they're constantly working, they will work themselves to death. You can lose upwards of 1,000 bees a day. And if your queen is laying 1,500 eggs a day, you can see that, chalk brood spreading within a colony could really, destroy its ability to take care of itself. Symptoms of chalk brood are confused with other conditions or infections, but you're going to look for cotton-like chalky white material covering the larva. Filaments or threads can be found throughout the larva. As the infestation worsens, the chalky white coloration changes to a gray or even a black appearance. And once the fungus has killed the larvae, it hardens them into a mummy-like appearance. In many cases, these mummified larvae can be found in the hive entrance or pollen traps. Dead larvae is also typically found in the brood nest. Eradicating chalk brood basically boils down to keeping a strong and healthy colony. A robust population of bees is more resistant to fungal infections than the weak hives. Basically, you want to keep it strong so it can fight against a potential infection. In severe cases, you can replace comb frames, and also burning the wooden frames that have been affected. Um, in cases where the fungus has caused damage, requeening may be necessary with a stronger stock. And then you also need to try and remove the dried out larvae, clean out the affected areas, and just build up the population of your colony. Again, the best way is just to keep a strong, healthy colony. European foul brood is also a bacterial disease that affects the larva before being capped. It's characterized by dead and dying larvae that can appear curled upwards. They can be brown or yellow. They can appear melted and or dried out and rubbery. The bacteria is ingested by the larva, which comes in the food, and it basically outcompetes the larva and will starve the larva. If it doesn't starve, the bee can survive until adulthood. Let's see. I guess it becomes more problematic where the nectar is sporadic, or maybe you have bad weather. There's fewer nurse bees in a colony to feed the larva. So let's see. Promising method for controlling foul brood has been basically a combination of removing contaminated equipment with the shook swarm method. So you're going to just take your bees, your frames that are contaminated, shake the bees out and put that frame back in. You're going to use antibiotics, and I don't think it's too large of a problem here though, but it is one of the things you do need to watch out for. So European foul brood, there's some pictures here of the affected larva. Small hive beetles. This is going to be something that's going to be a little bit more common, especially in the lower, warmer climates. You're going to want to place your hives in an area where they have a lot of sunlight. You don't want to stick them under a tree where they're constantly shadowy. So the more sunlight they have, the more resistance to the small hive beetle there will be. It's originated in the sub-Saharan Africa area, but has spread to pretty much all of the continents to my knowledge. It can be quite destructive pest in your colony, causing damage to the comb, to the honey, to the pollen. And if the infestation of the small hive beetles is too much, your bees can just abscond and leave your hive completely. And you'll just open your hive one day and there will be nothing there. They'll leave the honey, they'll leave the brood, they will just disappear. You have to watch out when you extract your honey that you don't let it sit around for a few days, as if there is eggs in the honey, then those will hatch and the larva will just make a mess of everything. So if you're not able to get to your honey extraction right away, freeze your frames. Good apiary management is basically your best defense. You're going to keep an eye out to see if you see them. You're going to keep your colonies strong and healthy. You're going to propagate bee stocks that have a genetic characteristic that are resistant to disease and pest. When you're combining colonies or exchanging comb, be careful. You want to make sure you're not introducing eggs or larvae from a stronger colony into a weaker colony that's not able to fight off the infestation. You're going to want to make sure your hive bodies are in good condition. They're not rotten, cracked, warped, or damaged, allowing for spots for your hive beetles to hide. And then finally, again, when you remove your honey from the colony, extract it within 2 days. Wax cappings are a favorite source of food for beetles and needs to be processed quickly. Don't leave the honey supers on your colonies for too long. If you have an infested hive, remove the unnecessary honey supers and that will lessen the area that needs to be patrolled by the bees. The bees are pretty good at, when they see small hive beetles, they will kind of corral them and chase them into corners of the colony, keeping them from doing too much damage. Again, you want to make sure your hives are exposed to more sunlight. Afternoon shade is okay, but you basically want to keep your colonies, your hives nice and warm. The bees don't like the sun. They get too hot. Cover the ground underneath your hives. Make sure that there is a nice barrier between the hives and the dirt. A lot of times eggs will fall through into the ground, the beetles will mature and come back up into the hive. So if they can't get into the ground, they will not make it back up to the hive. Make a bait. There are lots of baits that you can add into your hive, traps that you can add into your hive to basically, trap the beetles, get them out of your colony. Essential oils can be used as well, but please beware. You should be extremely careful. Too much of the oil can be detrimental to your bees, or it can just chase them out. So please be extremely careful when you use essential oils. Diatomaceous earth can be used. It's a natural treatment, and you basically spread it on the ground underneath and around your hive. That way, it will, actually don't know what it does, but basically it prevents the hive beetles from living, I believe. And lastly, again, freeze your frames of honey when you do remove them from a colony. And if you have a colony that dies out and you're not planning on filling it, throw those frames in the freezer for approximately 4 days, I believe, and then you can pull them back out and store them the way you normally would. Next is the wax moth. So basically, there's 2 different kinds, but they both will destroy a colony, and it's really nasty. They invade the unguarded comb during the season when they are active. They prefer comb that has pollen in it. And as a second choice, comb with cocoons, so empty brood comb. But they even live on pure wax with nothing in it. If you see a colony that's infested, basically the reason it got infested is, again, it was a weak colony. It was not able to fend off the wax moths. Prevention is not to give them more territory than they can guard. And this is really going to be an important factor in any kind of pest or disease. You want to make sure the bees have the right size home and they're not running around trying to protect and guard areas that, are just unnecessary. In a hive, if you see your bees are only on 2 or 3 frames, you don't want to be adding on another super on top of them. You want to wait till you see that there are bees covering, 8 of those 10 frames, and they've built out comb on 8 of those 10 frames before you throw on another box. Let's see. In other words, don't leave a lot of drawn comb in a hive that is small and struggling. Once they are infested, the solution is basically to reduce it down to just the amount of space that the cluster of bees can cover. Remove all the rest of the comb. If you have a freezer, freeze it to kill the moths, or if it's too far gone, just let the moths finish cleaning it up. And that's what this top picture is. That's all the nasty webbing and cocooning, and they will eat the wax, and it's just a big nasty mess. If they get to the end of the comb and it's just webs left, you're just gonna get rid of it. You've only got a tunnel or two in it, freezing is a way to save the comb. You usually only have a problem with colonies that have died out because they've gone queenless or gotten robbed out. Then there's other external threats. For us, that's going to be wasps, hornets, other insects, animals like skunks, bears, badgers, wolverines. Again, protecting your hive from external threats is going to be being aware of your surroundings and knowing what's in your area and how to act. Mouse guards and entrance reducers are going to help your bees a lot because the mouse guards have teeth in it that are basically the size that only bees can fit through. So wasps and hornets that are bigger are not going to be able to crawl in and rob out your hive. Also, it keeps mice from moving in, especially in the colder winter months and setting up shop in there. It also can serve dual purpose by flipping it over. And if you need to move a colony from one location to another, it locks the bees in, but while still allowing air to flow through. If you don't have a mouse guard, you can tack on, 1/4-inch hardware cloth. And then to reduce the entrance, you're going to use, I use a 1/2-inch strip of molding, and you can just duct tape those in place and reduce the entrance. An entrance reducer is important, and I actually use those almost all year long. And basically it takes the entire opening of your colony and reduces it down to a smaller size. That way your bees are only having to guard a 1 or a 2-inch opening versus a 12-inch opening. And so this can be quite helpful for your bees, especially when you have a smaller, younger colony that doesn't have a lot of bees. If you live in an area with larger threats such as bear, skunk, badger, again, prevention is key. It's not a matter of when they find or if they're going to find your hives, but rather when they find the hives. So I live in Eagle River, and Eagle River is known for bears. My first year beekeeping, didn't have a problem. Second year, I got hit by a bear, and then the bear kept coming back in our yard for a couple of weeks. So we essentially set up an electric fence really, really fast. We actually had the fence up before it got hit, but it was set up in a way that allowed our dog to travel through the fence, and the bear found that weakness. So that night at about midnight, we were re-rigging the electric fence so that now the bear didn't have access to those hives. And most people think, oh, the bears and these other animals, they're going after the honey. Actually, what they're looking for is the larva, because that is such a huge protein and energy source for them. They'll eat the honey, but really what they're looking for is the larva. And also ratchet straps. If you have your hive stand that your bees are on, and you've got your bees, not only your hive ratchet strapped, closed, but you've got it ratchet strapped to that stand, it's going to make it a lot harder for that bear or that badger or whatever other animal is trying to get in your hive. Other things that you can use are going to be motion censored lighting, alarms, and then there's another cool thing that we have on our chicken yard that they're called night guard solar lights. And it's basically these red blinking lights that mimic eyes at night. And so it keeps animals away from your hives. So this is a picture here. The top right is a picture of a mouse guard. If you have it in this position, it's going to allow your bees to travel in and out of your hive, no problem. And then if you take it out and flip it over, this will keep the bees locked in the colony, but it still allows for airflow. This is your mouse guard. You can have a very small, I think that's only about a 1-inch opening, or you can spin it around so that they have a 4-inch opening, for more air ventilation during warmer summer months. And these are just a couple of different setups of some bee yards. Let's see. Oh, that's what I'm looking for, this one. So this is another thing that I have done. I've crocheted actually quite a few of these. If you have a problem with wasps and hornets in your neighborhood, these animals tend to be territorial. So if they see that there is another wasp nest hanging around, they're not going to build a nest in that location. So I have about 5 or 6 of these all throughout my yard. And you don't have to crochet. You can also just take a brown paper bag, kind of fluff it up, put some plastic inside it and tie it shut and hang it upside down. The bees will, or the wasps and hornets will see that as a nest also. So you can kind of trick them into thinking this is not a suitable neighborhood to be in. And it did seem to make a difference. So I think I'm going to stick with that. All right, let's see. We can get to the next frame. All right, extracting your honey. As a first-year beekeeper, you may not extract honey this year because your bees have a lot of work to do. Basically, you're putting them in a colony that has frames and foundation, but no comb. So they're going to spend a lot of time those first few months just building up that comb so that they can, you know, create the home that they want. But your things you need to keep in mind before extracting honey is knowing your region. Know when the honey flows are, the nectar flows are in your area. If you know that the flow is on, then you know that this is time to be paying attention and adding the supers. As soon as one is full, you're going to add the next one, allowing your bees to store as much as the flow will allow. This is most important because if you take too much honey from one harvest, you need to have a backup nectar flow before winter or to help reduce the stores. Know your window. Know when is the best time to harvest honey. Everyone is different. Every state is different. And, you know, even here from Anchorage to Fairbanks, they're going to have different harvest areas or harvest windows. Knowing what's blooming when also helps. If you wanted to, say, only get buckwheat honey or only have fireweed honey, you can harvest your honey specifically timed to that nectar flow. Harvesting too early means you're going to have honey that hasn't been fully evaporated and it's got too much moisture in it and it will ferment. If you harvest too late, then you run risks into your honey freezing and it could then actually crystallize. You don't want to take too much from your colony so that they are able to survive the winter. And then if you chemically treat your colonies, you need to know when is the best time to do those treatments and remove the honey before you do the treatments. So there's always a lot to keep in mind. Again, know your honey. The process of turning raw nectar into honey requires several ingredients. Digestive enzymes from the bees, their efforts at storing and fanning it, and time. And when the workers have completed the transformation from nectar to honey, the comb cells will be capped with beautiful fresh wax. There's 2 types of wax cappings. You'll see some honey that looks white when it's capped in honey, and others that looks really dark. And you'll be able to see the difference. The white ones, there's actually an air bubble between the honey and the wax, and that's called dry cappings. The ones that look darker where you can kind of see the color of the honey, there's no air bubble there, and those are called wet cappings. Sometimes it's bee breed specific, sometimes it's colony specific, and sometimes you'll have a colony where, you know, some frames are wet and some frames are dry. It doesn't affect your honey at all. It's just how they cap it. And know your bees. Become into with your hives and their needs. Don't take more than you need or more honey than they can spare. You're going to want to leave, a general rule of thumb is about 40 to 60 pounds of honey in the hive to get them through winter. Now, if you live here in Alaska, they're going to need more than that. If you live in a warmer climate, they're going to need less than that because their winter's shorter and they can go out and gather more stores. Basically, it's about paying attention to the signs around you, and joining a local beekeeping club can help you find out when the nectar flows are, when there's a dearth, when there's a pollen surge. You just want to be very observant and act accordingly. Like I said, if this is your first year keeping bees, you may not harvest any honey this year, but then you could get lucky and have a very, eager colony, and they might, leave you with a few pounds. If you do harvest honey, using an extractor is the fastest and easiest way, and it's going to preserve the most comb that the bees can reuse in subsequent years. If you're a member of a bee club, a lot of bee clubs have already purchased an extractor that they will allow their members to use or borrow. If you're not a member of a club that has one, or you don't have access to an extractor, you can use what's called the crush and strain method. And that's basically what it is. You're cutting the comb out or scraping all that comb and honey out, and you're just going to get in there with your hands and strain, and you're going to crush it. And it's a lot of work. It's kind of fun, but it's extremely sticky. You can also get a couple of food grade totes and slice off the cappings and let the honey slowly drain out. It's a very long, drawn out, slow process, but that will also work. Once you're done extracting the honey, if you've used an extractor, you're going to place these now empty sticky frames back in the hive they came from. The bees will very quickly, you'll be surprised at how quickly they clean out these wet frames, moving leftover bits of honey to other frames, and they'll begin repairing or building the comb that's on those frames. So once you've collected honey, now what? What do you do at the end of the season? Basically, you're going to start prepping your bees to enter winter. This is accomplished by feeding them pollen in forms of loose powder as well as patties. And then you're also going to start feeding them sugar syrup. Not everyone feeds them syrup, but in colder climates, it's actually quite beneficial. And I'll get back to that in a little bit. Pollen serves as the protein, and it is used to feed and rear fat winter bees that are better able to make it through the long winter months. Bees will store the sugar syrup and cap it like they would regular honey, and then eat it when they need it. Instead of trickle feeding your bees, you're going to rapid feed them with in-hive feeders, essentially replacing the honey that you've removed from the hive. So if you live down south in Arkansas or Alabama, it's not quite as crucial to feed your bees right after you harvest the honey, because there's still going to be other plants out there that are producing nectar, producing pollen. Here in Alaska, this is actually the preferred method. Sugar syrup is basically a carbohydrate blend. It's just sugar and water. And it's considered kind of a clean food source due to the byproducts that come out of the bees after they've consumed it, which basically is just moisture through their respiration, and then they will burn up the energy. When a bee consumes honey, there's the moisture in there, which they get, and there's the sugar that they get, the natural sugars, but there's also bits of pollen and protein and other things in there, which is something that will have to be extracted from their intestinal tract and causing them to take cleansing flights. You want to reduce the number of cleansing flights taken during the winter, especially if it's 13 degrees above or below zero. Your bees just are not meant to handle those temperatures. So feeding is really up to you based on your location. If you do feed your bees, or you do have a longer winter, another thing that you can consider are using sugar bricks, candy boards, and fondant. These you place in the hive directly above the frame so that the bees have access to when their honey is gone and they still need food. Um, Generally, if they've been given enough syrup and have honey in their hive, they are pretty good through about February. At that point here, they need what we call emergency food. And that's when you're going to put these sugar bricks, the candy boards on. Actually, we put those in before winter so we don't have to open them up when it's still super cold, letting all their warm air out. But that's when they access those. And then lastly, based on your climate, the type of hive you have, the material it's made of, you may want to consider wrapping or insulating your hives. Wind blocks can also be useful. And in extremely cold climates, temperature controlled sheds or trailers are used to house bees over winter. If any of you watch YouTube videos, there's a really cool guy, the Canadian Beekeeper blog, and he goes through and he's got this essentially a warehouse sized building, and he forklifts all his bees in and he keeps them in a temperature controlled climate, humidity controlled. He's got fans, and it's really quite the neat endeavor that he does, but he's got a pretty high survival rate doing that. So this screen shows a couple of the different feeding methods. The top center and the top right show some in-hive feeding methods. The picture all the way to the left is a candy board. This is the bottom middle is considered a candy brick, and it basically goes in on top of your hive without its own special frame. And then lastly, I actually quite like this method. It's called the mountain cap method. And what you do there is you set some newspaper directly on top of the frames. You're going to slice a few holes in it, and you're going to pour just plain white sugar over the top of that paper. I like to do this in about October, November, depending on our temperatures. And as the bees respirate over the course of the winter, the moisture rises, and we'll take that loose powdery sugar and kind of crystallize it into a harder format. And when the bees need it, they will come up and eat from it, and it works quite well. And lastly, storing your equipment. You know, you're going to want to kind of figure out how are you going to store your equipment so it's out of the way of pests and spiders and mice. And basically hanging is kind of a tried and true method. It allows for a lot of airflow. It allows for economical storage and use of space. And there, as you can see in these pictures, there's a lot of different ways to do it. I kind of like this idea where they've taken some closets and added some extra bars that are fit to the frames, keeps them all in one location, but you can hang them in a shed, in your garage. There's a lot of options, but you just want to make sure that there's adequate air circulation. Lack of access by rodents are going to be your two main factors in how you store your equipment. And that is it. Does anyone have any questions at this point?
I have something I can contribute maybe.
Okay, sure.
This is Lonnie. I'm in Alabama, by the
Okay.
way. The diatomaceous earth.
Yes.
We've used that on chickens,
Yep.
on dogs that have fleas. You can
Mhm.
either put it directly on the dog, you can put it on their bed because it's not poison. Basically, what it is it's like you referenced in your slide. It's really old bones that have
Right.
been crushed down to talcum powder. And if you look at it under a microscope, they look like little sharp discs. And when the DE gets on the bugs, it does two things. One is it works its way into their joints, and they actually bleed or leak to death. And the other thing is the DE actually absorbs moisture from the bugs that it gets on. And so it dehydrates the animal that it, like the beetles and stuff like that.
Okay.
I mean, old folks around here, before there was cholesterol, it was all the thing to take cholesterol medicine. The old folks down south used to take DE and they would eat it and it would lower their cholesterol, is what I was told. I haven't
Oh, wow.
researched that, but I mean, you know, it's Alabama. There's some weird things happen down here. But just figured I'd throw that out there, Valerie. Thank you.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. And I know too, and I don't know if it makes a difference with the bees so much, but when you get the DE for your chickens, there is a higher, almost like a food grade version that you can get. So I would think that just to be on the safe side, if you're using it around your hives, I would just probably opt for that food safe, animal stock safe kind of version versus just your garden safe.
Yeah, because we used to get for the chickens, we used to get it from Tractor Supply Company,
Mm-hmm.
and it's food grade DE.
Right, right. Well, thank you for that, Lonnie.
Yes, ma'am.
Anyone else?
Hi, Valerie.
Hi.
Hi, this is Trisha. I'm
there.
just around the corner at Chugiak.
Oh,
and
okay.
First time beekeeper this year, so I'm learning a lot, but apparently I missed your previous 2 webinars that or Zooms that you put on.
Okay.
So I was wondering if there is any way to access those. So your last one, I've got off track on dates apparently.
Yeah, I
But
will.
your last one is really the one I need.
So if you want to message me, and that way I can send you information on that.
Okay, perfect.
Which
I would appreciate that
Facebook
very
page
much.
did you see it on? Was that Midnight Sun?
Probably that one or the Royal. I'm trying to
Okay.
remember the Royal.
Yeah, Royal Alaskan Honey.
Royal Honey.
I did on,
Mhm.
I'm pretty sure on Midnight Sun, I posted the PowerPoint for it. I didn't do the recording, but I do have
Okay.
the PowerPoint on Midnight Sun for both of the previous 2.
Okay. Oh, that'd be awesome. I'll double check in there. Haven't been real consistent with that, so that'll be good.
So I'm not sure. Kevin messaged that, have you tried using an Italian queen cage to induce a brood break? So I have not, I actually don't know what an Italian queen cage is. Kevin, do you want to talk about that, or?
Hi,
I
can you
know-
hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of lectures in the UK, how they, especially like Italy, where they built up a resistance Varroa has to a lot of pesticides and some of the chemical treatments. So they started and they created these little, well, they're about 3x5 cages that hang off the frame, and they cage the queen, and they do that for about 25 days. Because Varroa reproduce in cap larvae, all the larvae hatches out. There's no place for them to reproduce, and therefore it's like essentially creating a swarm too. So then it reduces the Varroa count. I was wondering if you tried it, or if you heard anything about it.
So I have not yet. I do have a few different other queen cage kind of brood break methods that I'm going to use this year. Last year, at the end of the season, I ended up picking up a couple of colonies from someone who was not wanting to try to overwinter her bees here in Alaska. And she already had frames that were portioned out to where the queen was in a cage all by herself, but the worker bees had access to her. So yes, brood breaks is a very viable method for Varroa management, and I am going to try and work some more with that this year.
Thank you.
Yep. So essentially, when you split a hive, that kind of simulates a brood break as well. and the hive that is left with the queen cell will have that brood break. So it is a very common way of managing Varroa. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. And in addition, what they did is they created a brood break during a dearth period. And what happened is that the colony size didn't really increase as much and therefore eat resources. So they ended up with a better honey production,
Oh, okay.
a few more pounds. So yeah, I thought that was interesting and was going to try that this year too. I just wanted your feedback on it. Thank
Okay.
you.
So they make sure to time that during the dearth. That's good to know.
Right. And just
Okay.
before the major, Varroa goes up, like in July and August, really
Right.
high. Well, where I'm at in New York. So if you time it right, it creates a break at the right time, like I said. All right, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for that.
Hey Valerie, Steve, here from Wasilla.
Oh, hey, Steve.
Had a quick question. How prevalent are the small hive beetles up here in the area?
Really, I don't think it's too much of a problem here by us. I've had bees for a couple of years here, and my sister-in-law had them for a year out in Willow, and we haven't had any problems. I think the biggest probably chances that you might get one would be in with a package if they get tossed in. But I really haven't heard too many instances of people here in Alaska having to worry about them. Maybe Fairbanks area might have a little bit more because they do get a little bit warmer during the summer, but I haven't heard too much.
Okay, I was just wondering because I hadn't heard anything very much either. Looking at the sites for the last couple of years, so I was just wondering if it's something no one was talking about or just really not all that prevalent up here.
No, they're not super prevalent. I think mites are going to be your biggest issue.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Stephanie, were you going to say something?
I have a few questions that might have been more applicable to last week, but
Sure.
today was the day I was assembling my hive. So I've got polystyrene
Mhm.
and the entrance reducer that goes just right inside the mouse guard, right?
Right outside.
Outside. Okay.
Yep.
Because I was like, it's not fitting the way that I think it should fit. So, okay. That explains why. Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
So you want it to be able to have your mouse guard and then your entrance reducer in front of it. So if you need for some reason to flip it to maybe we have a really hot summer again, you want to open it up, let a little bit more airflow in or out. That's why you're going to use that.
That makes sense. And then since you had mentioned that you had to do some bear proofing,
Yes.
we also need to do some bear proofing. And my space for my bees is actually away from the house. So I don't know, like, would solar power be enough to zap the bear? I'm thinking I might need to also just make the fence higher than I had anticipated. So we've got
yes.
a bear that goes right through that area every year. It's like his little pathway. So.
Gotcha. So yeah, you can, where are you located, Stephanie?
I'm up Skyline.
Skyline. Oh, okay. So you're really close to me. I'm where Skyline and Eagle River Loop meet.
Oh, perfect. Yep. We're 2 miles up Skyline. So I have a neighbor who I don't know, but he has bees and I've kind of spied on his setup and I was going to copy it, but I think I might have to do things a little bit differently since mine are further away from the house. And
so there is a fence place in Palmer. I think it's called Fence Emporium. They've got all the pieces parts for your electrical fencing that you need.
Okay.
You can also go to Alaska Mill and Feed, and they have a lot of electric fence pieces parts there as well. I believe with the solar setup, you can get like a car battery to attach it to, and that way it can continually have some form of power.
Okay.
So I was at Alaska Mill and Feed today,
Mm-hmm.
and I got overwhelmed, but we're just trying to figure out all the different ones. They had one solar powered one there that was a 0.04 joules. So I was just trying to figure out if that was enough capacity too for bears, because on the package, it was like dogs. It went up to
Yeah.
dogs would be like the
Probably
highest.
not. Probably not.
Mhm.
And what I've read that you should do is, well, like Trisha or Stephanie with you, since you've got an area where the bear travels all the time, he's going to sniff it and he's going to realize what's happening. But if you're in an area that maybe you get the bear occasionally, take a can of tuna or a couple slices of bacon and drape that over that electrical fence line. The smell of the can or the meat is going to draw that bear in, and he's going to come to it and sniff it or try to bite it, and he's going to get a zap in really the most sensitive place that he can get a zap. And he's going to learn real quick, this is something to stay away from. And then they're going to be a lot less curious from that point forward.
I would never have thought of that. So
Mhm.
I will
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yep, no problem.
definitely. And then my last question, which I feel like is probably a really dumb question for people who know what they're doing, but I don't. So the brood box, it just lays on the base, right? I don't need to glue it down or
Nope.
anything like that. It just
Nope.
sits. Okay.
It just sits there. And the
There were no
reason,
instructions, but I'm gonna have to go bug Nathan. And I was like, wait, I'll just ask Valerie. Perfect.
so the reason you don't physically attach it is because if you winter your bees over and you've got your brood box and maybe a second brood box, and or if I don't know if you run deeps or mediums, but the standard for brood boxes over winter is 2 deeps. If you run mediums, it's going to be 3 mediums. It creates that same volume. So over the course of winter, your brood box is down here and they start eating their way through the honey and the sugar syrup and whatever you give them. Now they're up at the top. And if the bees have honey up here, the queen won't go through that. And a lot of time queens don't like to travel downward to start laying again. So at the end of winter, you'll have to take your bees that have survived and are up here at the top, and you're going to switch boxes and put them down at the bottom and then stack again.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I've got the 3.
Interesting. Okay.
I'm
That's
still
what I
learning.
have too. Nathan's probably recommending three mediums.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, mediums
That's
are
what I'm
nice
starting with.
because it gets really heavy. When it's
They're
full
not
of
heavy.
honey,
Right.
it is all of 75 to 80 pounds, and that's a medium. A deep, if you run all deeps,
Right.
Full of honey can be 100 pounds. And, if you've got it stacked up, that gets quite awkward.
I remember Nathan.
But I remember he did say, yeah, there's the screen that's on the bottom too, the rodent screen. The rodent screen, is that what it is?
Mhm.
That he said that we should glue to the bottom of the polystyrene. To glue that to the bottom.
The mouse guard?
Not the mouse guard.
Okay,
the screen.
So most of my boxes, my bottom boards already have a screen in them. And those are like sealed in there for airflow. For the
so the polystyrene ones they're not connected. It's just free floating there. So he said it's probably best to just take some Gorilla Glue and glue that down to that bottom board.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yep. Yeah, because you don't want anything crawling up and under and pushing its way through.
Try to use something other than fiberglass screen though, because rodents and some bugs will eat through fiberglass. I have top bar hives and I have metal screen along the bottom of mine.
Yeah, these are metal.
Yeah.
Okay.
These are metal screens. Yes. Yeah. And then the other thing that he said we needed to do with those polystyrene is in the top, it has a gap between where the frames are and the top of the lid. He said that there needs to be something in there. Does that make sense? I'm trying to picture what I need to put in there. He said like even a quilted material or something to take up the space so it doesn't just get filled. Because those polystyrenes are just a little different.
There is a little bit more space, but it's not very much. So in the winter, what I do is I have my top box that has the frames, And then you can take, do you know what Reflectix is?
Uh-huh.
It's like a silvery shiny bubble wrap.
Yes.
So you can cut that to the size of your frame or of your box.
Mhm.
So, and I use the outer dimensions of the size of my box, and I cut it to that, and I will even cut the center hole that matches the inner cover.
Okay.
So you have your box with the frames, you have your Reflectix, then you have your inner cover, and then you can have your lid.
Mhm.
And that
Okay.
way, there's a little bit of insulation. It fills that gap between the top of the frames and the inner cover. That's about the only thing I can think of that
Right.
he
Right.
was talking about.
Was probably talking about. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And then
Thank
that
you.
way it allows moisture to come out through the top as well.
Mhm.
Good questions, guys.
Okay, so time to go get mine glued together. That's where I'm at.
And if you have the
I may go take care
polystyrene, if you paint them, make sure you paint only the outsides. You don't want to paint the inside surfaces that the bees are on. Do not spray paint because it will dissolve your polystyrene. You don't
Right.
want that.
Yes.
Trying to think what else. If
Nope,
you've got
picked up
wood,
some latex.
yep,
I
latex
did
exterior.
polystyrene, just some latex. Yep.
Yep,
Got that all ready to go.
awesome. And
Awesome. Thanks,
the only
Valerie.
other thing
Appreciate
is, oh, awesome. I'm glad you guys enjoyed. And if you have any questions, let me know. And I will definitely get back to you on those.
Okay, awesome.
All right. Well,
Thank
thank
you
you
so
all.
much.
Happy beekeeping.
Bye.